Well, there's been a lot that's been happening over the past 6 months, isn't there? Yes. Where does it fit in? That's what we want to consider. So here's our first question. This is a question I like to ask my Jewish acquaintances. What nation helped Israel to come out of Egypt at the time of the Exodus? Yes, Sister Jan.
Egypt. Egypt.
And what nation was it that helped keep them from leaving Egypt?
Egypt. Probably Egypt.
That's right. So, yes, I see Nancy's hand.
None.
I think that's right. Really none. And is that important that there was none?
Yeah.
Yes, it was important. Why was it important?
Because it had to show God's strength and God's like it was God's decision and it was helping them. And we had
That's right. So, if you think about it, if there had been any nation that helped Israel to come out of Egypt at the time of the Exodus, that nation would have taken the credit for it. As a result, there's no out. Oh, okay, Brother Ken, go ahead. Go ahead. No, you're picked now.
Well, I thought it was such an interesting question, and you put it down as a trick question, and so we're like, okay, what's the trick? We just say no nation helped, but then we think about it. I looked up the word trick, and one of the definitions is, okay, if you're going to do something, here's the trick to do it. Put your skis on one ski at a time, and you can avoid falling. And it's interesting that, I mean, it was only through plagues that Egypt conceded, and they really didn't want to concede then, and they were spoiled, but then they came after them at the Red Sea also. But it's interesting that what maybe the reason is because he wanted them to count on him and to know him more. We know in Exodus 3:13, where he's told him, he says, the God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? This is the question that Moses has to God. And God says unto Moses, I am that I am. And he says, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am have sent me unto you. And Moses said, and God said moreover unto Moses, thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, Jehovah, the God of the fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. And so God, he's come to Elohim of Jehovah, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is done this to him. And it's interesting that he later tells them that when he came to the fathers, he said El Shaddai, God Almighty, but he did not come to them as Jehovah. So this is a relationship beginning with it, and all of the enemies from Egypt to the Amalekites to Edom to Moab to Ammon to Sihon of the Amorites and to Og would all teach them lessons on their dependency on God.
Okay, thank you, Brother Ken. Anyone else? A significant thing is that no nation could take the credit for the Exodus. As a result, the credit can only go to Jehovah our God. Now, when my Jewish friends think about it and they can't come up with an answer, then my next question will be, you think it will be that way at this end of the age? Well, we can go on to the next slide. So we've had a lot of major world events in the past century and a half. And how have these major world events brought Israel back to their land? Now, if we start back in the 1870s, that's when the Long Depression began. Now, at the time, they called it the Great Depression. When we got to the 30s, they decided they wanted the term for the 1930s, and so they renamed this one the Long Depression. So it lasted about 20 years, starting in the 1870s. What effect did it have on bringing Israel back to the land? Brother Kerrigan.
I would say the decline of the Ottoman Empire.
That is the big thing. What's significant about the Ottoman Empire? Okay. Your brother, Chip.
They had to rule over that area for Israel, and they could where that's the important part.
That's right. They've been ruling Palestine for almost half a millennium. So they were the rulers. Brother Kid, Lynn.
I think especially during that long depression, that's very time when Israel was able to purchase land. And it was the first element of being able to even have a place to go back. So I think 1878, the rich Jews that were from US were purchasing that land. So that was a key element in that depression. They were able to do that.
Okay, good. Anyone else to add to that? Then just a little detail or two here. The Long Depression began in 1873, but that didn't immediately make it possible for foreign Jews to come to Palestine. But in the fall of 1874 through the spring of 1875, there was a horribly poor harvest in the Balkan Peninsula. And as a result, the Ottomans took the whatever they could from the Christian farmers who couldn't pay their dimitude tax. And as a result, there was the Christian Revolt of June and July 1875, and it led to an Ottoman Empire bankruptcy in 1876. And at that time, the first Jewish prime minister of England became prime minister, and he could say to the Ottoman Turks, "Look, you guys are poor. You need money. I think I can find you some buyers for this no-good land in Palestine." And he agreed to it. Their first proposed purchase, he turned them down. The second one, he put it in the territory that was infested by malaria mosquitoes. So in 1878, I should precede this. After the Christian Revolt came, the Ottomans put it down. The following year, we had I think it was Montenegro and Bulgaria revolted from the Ottomans, and that was brutally repressed. And the Russians now could see what's going on there. The Ottomans are taking full control of the Balkans. They can't afford that. They can't afford to go into war, and they can't afford not to. So they went into war, and they were already at Adrianople in February of 1878. And that's only 100 miles from what was then the Ottoman capital in Istanbul. So the Ottomans agreed to an armistice. And then it was that the foreign Jews were allowed to buy land, and those, I think, came from either Romania or Russia to come. And in already November 3rd of 1878, they established Petah Tikva, the Door of Hope. So, and just I think months later came Gai Oni, and roughly as another new Jewish community every year thereafter. And the first Aliyah began in 1882. So this, you can say, is one of the great outcomes for Israel of the Long Depression. Now, next major world event after that, let me precede this with one thing. If you look at history, what is the first major worldwide event, catastrophe, calamity, since the flood? It probably is the Long Depression. because it truly did become worldwide. Before they had worldwide travel, it would be difficult for anything to be worldwide. But do you think that had something to do with our Lord Lieutenant?
Yeah.
So the next major world event after that was World War I. What did it have to do toward bringing Israel back to the land? Ah, yes, Sister Deb.
Just and overall, it was really amazing to, if you look at history, and I'm not good at history, but kings fell, a whole new system, a whole new gap was opened up in powers within different nations that totally crumbled as a result of World War One. But we like to remember the Balfour Declaration, 1917. That first Jewish prime minister. And just a few paragraphs, a few sentences changed everything for Israel. Over.
That was Lord Balfour. Although he himself was not a Jew, he did listen to Chaim Weizmann, who had something to do with making war materials more affordable in England. So, in World War I, which side did the Ottomans wind up on? Central Powers, that's right. And did the Central Powers win?
No.
So the Ottomans went down, and the British gained the mandate over the land of Palestine. And that's illustrated in the Balfour Declaration, setting aside Palestine as a homeland for the Jews. Next major world event after that, Great Depression, 10 years, 1929 to 1939. What did it contribute, either good or bad? What happened in the 1920s and then in the early 1930s?
It set the way for lack of security there in Europe, so that it gave a foothold for Hitler to be able to say, see, all these governments are not helpful, and I've got an idea, I've got a solution.
Okay, that's good. And so when we think about what happened back in the 1920s, that was the rise of fascism in Italy. Yes, Brother Ken?
Well, it's interesting that around that time there was, Christian fundamentalism
Yes.
was come up and modernism were as each other, and so the Protestants had a lack of power. They were even doubting what they had said. But this idea, I think, that came through there was in the Great Depression. There was something that came about from earlier with evolution, was this idea of eugenics. And there was this idea that one race was better than another race, and that being forged in America, the Great Depression kind of put a debunk on that, because now everybody's knocked down a notch. But Adolf Hitler and Mein Kampf, he never forgot that. And that was, I think, the breeding of what we're going to see in World War II and the setting up that Great Depression set up of what was going to happen with the hunters of Germany.
Okay, thank you. When we get to Adolf Hitler, initially when he came to power, it was so many Jews. If you want to leave Germany, you may do so and take 50,000 marks with you. The rest you leave behind. And so when the Mufti, yes.
Brother Jim, I just wanted to add, in between World War I and leading up to the Great Depression, those weren't peaceful years, and especially in Germany. I think the war reparations were so difficult, it made it impossible for their economy to function, and the value of their currency was completely deflated. And, I think there were accounts, and I got this, there's a really good documentary, I think it's on Amazon Prime, it's called Impossible Peace. And it follows the decades in between World War I and World War II. It was not a peaceful time in most of the countries that were involved in that. So, and it also, but in that documentary, it talked about people would sit down to get a cup of coffee and they'd want to pay for it immediately because by the time they got done with a cup of coffee, it would have appreciated by so much because their money was worthless. But also, the other thought is many times in these countries when they had economic difficulties, who did they blame? They blamed the Jews. So it was incentive for them to get out of there, I think.
That's excellent. This is a problem. If a politician has to blame somebody, is he going to blame himself? A fellow told me from Germany, told a group of us from Germany, he said, well, when Hitler came to power, first he said, we can give you some economic advantages in return for some freedoms your neighbors don't really need. And then it was, we can give you a few more economic advantages in return for a few freedoms you yourselves don't really need. Mm-hmm. And by the time we had our economic advantages, we had no freedoms. So the result was to blame the Jew and try to start cleaning them out of Germany. Judenrein is what they wanted to be, completely clean of Jews. Now, I might say that there are certain limitations on that. If I don't take too long, that I went to school with two Israelis, and one of them said, when Hitler came to power, my mother had been politically active. So he got a phone call from a policeman who said, would you meet me down at the local pub? Which he did. He says, I have been noticing your wife lately. She seems very tired. Don't you think you should take her on a vacation? Now, he got the message. They grabbed what they could. They went to Berlin, from Berlin out of the country. The other one took a nuclear reactor engineering course with her. She said, that she was in Munich, Bavaria, during World War II. And that was Hitler's power base in Munich. So I asked, weren't you in danger during the war? And she said, oh no, I was a microbiologist. That was a critical occupation. So neither I nor any of my family were in any danger. So those are a couple of personal experiences. But mainly, the Great Depression served the purposes of pushing the Jews to get out of Germany. But what country would take them? It was mentioned, I think, earlier that some went to Sweden, that the Danes smuggled them into Sweden. But mainly, the only country in the world that was willing to accept them was the Philippines. The U.S. rejected them. Roosevelt turned the ship back when they came with the Jews. So some of them, of course, made into Palestine. But then came World War II. What effect did World War II have on restoring Jews to Palestine? Let's see, I see two. Okay, Brother Tom first, and then Chip.
Well, it was the time of the hunters, the Holocaust, and the Hitler's final solution, and so that drove them to escape. You know, it wasn't just the attraction or the economic circumstances, but their lives were on the line.
Good. And Brother Allison.
Maybe add to that a little bit. Yeah, they were gathering them up, putting them in camps, and also extracting them. And they were planning to extract children, and ship them out, get them out. But the Grand Mufti from Jerusalem went over there and made a deal, went in and made a deal, and then come about with our extermination.
That's right. That's good. I mean, it was terrible. But again, analysis.
Yeah, and with that, we hear never again from Jewish people, and you talked about how did any nation help them when they were coming out of Egypt? Will any nation help them now? But there was this now they have seen that what they're up against. That spirit, I think, is the spirit of Amalek. Because remember that spirit of Amalek, they attacked those in the back and those that were weak. And that's just what happened with Nazism, and that's just what we've seen that happened with Hamas. But that they have been strengthened by that. That is a terrible thing, but they've come more to rely on their God, and they know that they're there for a purpose. I think that has been pointed out.
Yeah, good. So, oops, we seem to be missing something.
They weren't seeing it on Zoom, so
Okay.
it got correct.
So, glad we have that correct. One more. Next one. Okay, yeah. So, Great Depression, it was to make the Jews unwelcome in Germany. World War II extended the boundaries east and west so that it was much of Central Europe, maybe most of Central Europe, where the Jews were unwelcome and they would do their best to go anywhere they could. And the most logical place to go was Palestine. Now, after World War II, we come to the so-called Cold War, the East versus West. And what has been the effect of that period of time on Jewish immigration to Palestine? But again, okay, there's what's back here. Let's see. Is there somebody? Yes, Sister Jan.
Well, they gained statehood, which was very important. And from the moment that they gained statehood, they were literally fighting for it. So throughout the Cold War era, they were fighting, in 1967, in 73, and so on. And, always fighting the Arabs that were trying to obliterate them, and they continue doing that today.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. That's the big one, of course, the independence. When the Jewish population there was, let's see, Brother Len, and when the Jewish population is only about 600,000, some say as much as 650,000. Do you realize that there's 6 million in Israel today?
Seven.
It's not seven.
Just reached 7.
Right, that's the total population.
Total Jews, just reached 7.
So that's made a big boost. Yes, go ahead.
Well, a big thing during that Cold War period was, of course, the fall of the Soviet Union. That ended up allowing a lot of the Jews to go back from those countries that were there.
Excellent. And Brother Ken.
Brother Jim Parkinson put in his list, he said it devastated Catholic traditionalism and increasing Israel immigration from the East. So communism was upon the beast, but there's that next hunter that's driving them. Communism, Fiddler on the Roof.
That's good. At the peak, there was 1 year it reached 100,000 from the Soviet Union, now the Soviet disunion, that went back just in 1 year to Israel. So now we come down to the period of COVID, starting about 2020, all right? Yes.
I think Brother Ralph had a thought.
Yes.
On, not on the last part, I was just gonna add in that Israel actually gained access to all of it during that period of time and gave up part of their land, so it caused problems.
That's right. Give up what the Lord gives you and you pay for it. And, really, God made the land so he can give it to whomever he prefers. And Genesis 15, it seems pretty evident, it was given to Israel. Okay, so what has happened in any of the world as respects the Jews and going back to Israel? Yes.
I don't know if you've ever looked into it, but the immigration numbers and where people are coming from. And then you look back at those countries and what was going on in those countries from which they're coming. And I think the thought is anytime there's financial issues in those countries or political unrest, or, you can take it to 2020 and look at COVID, which was worldwide. But anytime there's some type of issue that makes life uncomfortable in those countries, it's a motivation or a propelling factor for them to go back to Israel or to go to Israel.
Okay. There's effects in both the East and the West. Anything interesting happening in the last year or so? Let's see, who is next? Yes, Brother Tim.
October 7th, there's a vivid memory where there was an attack by them on Israel. Many killed, many taken captive. Retribution was invasion of northern Gaza, spreading to the mid section, and now in the southern section, and many, many thousands killed. And pressure is mounting on Israel to stop the war, have peace. Their answer, no, we haven't done the job yet. We still got quite a few more Hamas soldiers in hiding, even in hospitals. So we're going to continue. What is the effect of all that is anti-Semitism will go intense. It doesn't look good for Israel. Her lovers are leaving her. Wall villages are still unwalled, and she can still get rockets into the city, the streets, and the inhabitants daily, almost. So that is the effect on Israel. Now, what is God going to do about it?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Brother Len, down here.
One of the things noted, especially since the war began, is we're seeing a number of younger Jews going back to Israel to join the IDF. And that's a phenomenon that's only come since the war because they feel an alliance to Israel. So I just didn't see the exact numbers, but it's coming from not just the US, but other countries where, as Brother Thomas said, anti-Semitism raising, but they're going back and defending what they believe is Jewish homeland.
Good. And Brother, over here, Brother Ken Ellison.
And Brother Lynn, how many Jews are in New York? Is there like 6 million Jews in New York City? Is that fair?
That's more the population of the U.S., Jewish population of the U.S.
There's 6 million, and there's the thought that with this, I noticed you have COVID up there, and COVID might go along with that ninth plague, the darkness that was in the land, and then the sixth plague of the drying up of the river Euphrates. With COVID, there has been controls put down, and they've been put down for a while, that you can't, it's hard to find the truth on anywhere you go on the news, and there is a great push towards anti-Semitism that I think has been growing since that Cold War era in our universities and all of that. And what Brother Lynn said about, I mean, there's many that have made Aliyah to fight in Israel, but you think with this increased anti-Semitism that maybe we'll see more of it. We'll see more Aliyah so that the West would then be drawn to Israel as the East was by communism.
Good. And was there one more over here? Okay, if not, I'll try to summarize this part here. With the Great Depression, yes.
Oh, and Sister Jan had a thought too. Just real quick, I fly in and out of Newark for work quarterly, and they used to have one flight a day, Tel Aviv on El Al Airline. They've added a second flight now.
Ah, very good. Now, with the Great Depression, they were being forced out of Germany. With World War II, forced out of Central Europe. With the Cold War, what happened during the Cold War? They were forced out of many places in Eastern Europe. And what is the Ukraine war done? Caused Jews to go back not only from the Ukraine, but also from Russia itself. But there's one more place to come back from. Almost half of the non-Israeli Jews in the world are in one country, this one. It doesn't look good to me. And we see the rise of anti-Semitism in the mainstream media. So I think now we'll go on to the next one. This sets the stage for Armageddon.
Brother Jim,
Yeah.
you said Ukraine and Russia that they were coming out of, and then you didn't say the third one. What was the third one? I missed it.
Well, the third part would be coming from the West, because that hadn't happened yet. But the October 7th event last year has certainly helped to gel a lot of those who were not so enthusiastic about Israel. And I mean Jews there, not enthusiastic about Israel, suddenly realize they have every reason to be interested in Israel, sending the youth back to help out. Because they realize with what's happening in the West, Israel is the only place they will have an opportunity to flee. Okay, now we go to Ezekiel 38, and see, where did I put my Bible? Here we are at Ezekiel 38, and I'd like to have somebody read that. And let's see, who has Ezekiel chapter 38? And I'd like to have verses 1 through 6 read. Sister, that's loud.
Ezekiel 38, 1 through 8, is that what you wanted?
Oh, 1 through 6.
I want to say. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against God, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine enemy, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya, with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah, and north of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. That's
Kings, that's good. So the first time we read that, does that mean a lot? Maybe we got to find out a little bit more about these nations. And so I'm going to ask Sister Sunny, would you like to turn to Genesis chapter 10? No? Okay, Sister Tammy, would you like to turn to Genesis chapter 10 and read verses 2 and 3? How's that?
Chapter 10 with number
2 and 3 would be
chapter 2.
chapter 2.
Chapter 10, verse 2.
2 and 3.
The sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog, and Medad, and Javan, and Tubai, and Mesish, and Turas. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, and Riphah, and Togarmah.
Thank you.
Terrible names.
Well, that's all right, but you got the idea. So we see some of these names identified here under Jacob. And Gomer is divided into Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The Septuagint is Torgama, from which we get our word Turk. But who would Ashkenaz be? Germans. That's right. And Germans, specifically, it would be, but Germanic generally, which would include the Scandinavians, Skansen. We get that from Ashkenaz. And so it includes the Scandinavians, it would include the Austrians, it would include the Anglos and the Saxons and so forth. It's us. Yes. And so now the next one is Riphath. Who is Riphath? The ancient Slavic homeland was called the Carpathian Mountains, the Kara Riphath, the mountains of Riphath, because it was from there that the Slavs spread abroad, east of Ashkenaz, east of the Germanic tribes. And then lastly, we have Togarmah. And that would be the Turkic peoples, not only modern Turkey, but others like Turkestan. And actually, I think they're related to both the original Huns and the Finns. So why separate out Togarmah? And perhaps it is because Ashkenaz and Riphath have a common religious background. But the Turks, including Turkestan, are Muslim instead. So perhaps that's why they're identified separately. And then we go to Madai. Any idea who Madai is? The Medes. That's right. It's the Medes. Now, it mentions Persia. Who are the Persians? Okay, yes, that's right. Good name for country people who want to get out of there. So, the Media Tekla-Upharsin and the Furas is identified as a division because the Persians were a division of the Medes. Do we see the Persians or the Iranians changing sides these days? Ever since 1979 and the overthrow of the Shah? Do we realize how earth-shaking this is? Because King Cyrus of Persia managed to kill the son of the queen of the Massagetic, or the Magog tribe. She in turn came with a massive force and killed King Cyrus. For 25 centuries, the Iranians or Persians have been at gross odds with the great Russians. It has only been in our time that this prophecy could plausibly be fulfilled. Now, next we have Tubal and Meshach. So, who is Tubal? Anybody? If nobody has a thought, I can speak freely. Would somebody like to read Ezekiel? I think it's 27. It's either probably verse 13. Let me check that. Yes, that would be verse 13. Sister Jan Mora, would you like to read for us Ezekiel 27:13?
Yeah.
Ezekiel 27:13. Gavin, Tubal, and Meshach, they were thy merchants. They traded the purses of men and vessels of brass in thy market.
Thank you. That's just right. Traded for vessels of copper. So what's significant about that? Well, modern Armenia still has the copper mines, and Tubal, that's the Georgians in the south side of the Caucasus Mountains. They were the ancient site of metallurgy, and the Greeks, the Ionians, Yavin, they had colonies, 2 colonies on the east side of the Black Sea. So we see what's going on. Meshach mined the copper. Georgia or Tbilisi, Tubal, they refined the copper, and then the Greeks, they made the copperware. So that helps us easily to define who Tubal and Meshach are. In fact, there's a more modern city called Caesarea Mazaka, meaning the Caesarea of Meshach. Now, who is Cush? That's in Genesis 10, verses 6 through 10. Would somebody like to read that? Sherelle, you're by the edge of the aisle.
Sure. Genesis,
Genesis 6 through 10.
6 through 10. The sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabtaka. The sons of Rama, Sheba and Dedan. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar.
Okay, thank you. And you take the word Cush in the Hebrew. How is it commonly translated in our English translations? Starts with the letter E. Ethiopia, that's right. So it's what one brother likes to call sub-Saharan Africa, is Cush. But who does that leave for Put? It's Libya. Yes, actually Libya and the rest of the nations farther to the west, all the way Tunisia, Algeria, and so forth. So that's what they call North Africa, everywhere west of Egypt. But now we have another group down here in verse 13. And who would like to read? Yeah, first.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Where is Niger involved in there?
Niger would be part of sub-Saharan Africa, and actually it's in the Sahara itself on the southern portion. Now Nigeria, that's down to the coast, and Nigeria has, I think, about 30% of all of the black population in Africa. So Nigeria is really significant there. Of course, they have their tribes and sub-tribes. There's 250 different native languages in Nigeria. So it's not all one people. Okay. So now we come to verse 13, and who would like to read Ezekiel 38:13? Whoever gets there first. Yes, and that's it.
Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, southern Spain, with all its young lions, villages, will say to you, have you come to take the spoil? Have you assembled your hordes of fighting men to seize plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take great spoil?
Okay, good. And now it may be a little bit broader than the interpretation that's in the Amplified version, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe a little broader than suggested there. But we find Sheba and Dedan in two different sets of genealogies. In 10 verse 7, descended from Cush. But in verse 25, chapter 25, verse 3, descended from Abraham. So what we get from that is there's some place in Arabia where there is a mixture of black and Semitic peoples. And that would seem to be the Yemen. Especially if you look at the photographs there, you'll see that Yemenites, many of the Yemenites are much darker than the rest of Arabia. But who is Tarshish? Okay, Brother Ken Allison.
Seems that it might be Brit, because in Ezekiel 27:12 it says, Tarshish was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of all kinds of riches, with silver, iron, tin, and lead they traded for the wares. So it that part of Europe, maybe they go through the Mediterranean and see up around what the Amplified suggests as Spain, and maybe the pinpoint there is Britain.
You've got a point there. It makes it easy to remember. But southwestern Spain a millennium ago used to be known as Tartessus. And so there's one people that has occupied the territory all the way from there on up to England. Because the Irish say that their original inhabitants came from Greece. Curious. And so we call those tribes that inhabited the western part of Europe, from Spain and Portugal on up to Belgium and over into Great Britain, especially the western part. Those are what we call the Celtic people or the Celtic people. That would include the Gauls, for example. But we are identifying it from Ezekiel 28 or 27:12 it is. Because in Ezekiel 27:12 it tells about the merchants of Tarshish and all the young lions thereof. Well, all the former colonies, does this mean not only westernmost Europe, but also the Americas, maybe Australia and New Zealand? We'll watch and continue to watch. Okay, we can go on to the next slide, I think, now. Oh, I missed one thing here. I will just comment on this here before we change the slide. We can see these alliances forming that Ashkenaz and Ripah, are they completely on the Russian side? Well, the Slavic countries are largely under the domination, not as much as they were. But Germany, why would they be on the eastern side? And the answer turns out to be pretty simple. The Russians have the resources, but don't have the technology. The Germans have the technology, but they don't have the resources. Enough said on that, I guess, for now. The Persians we've seen changing. Tubal and Meshach are not really in a geographic position to avoid Russian domination. Kush, well, we see a lot of activity going on between Russia and China in sub-Saharan Africa. And similarly, of course, what's going on in Libya. And we do see Sheba and Dedan. We see Arabia sort of slowly changing sides. Oh my, oh my. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, what we can learn about it from the Hebrew word sagab is to lift up. The God is that which is lifted up like a rope. And so they are the elevating people. And we get our word Scythian from Saka Ta. Saka is the eastern form of what God is in the Western countries. And so then we have the Ma Saka Ta. That is the region of the Saka hordes. And what do they have in common with the God, the Magog of Revelation 20, verse 8? I'll just offer a suggestion here. And that is, when you hear something from Russia, or when a Russian in this country hears something from Russia, does he believe it? A lot of lying and deceit. It kind of suggests to us what will happen at the end of the 1,000 years when Satan is loose. Those characteristics will be similar. Okay, we'll go to the last slide then. How does the current Gaza war fit in? What happened in 1940? It's already mentioned the independence. 1956, what was that? Yeah, Sinai War. That's right. Suez Canal. 1967? Six-Day War. Six-Day War, right. 73. Okay. And 1982 and 2006? That. And also the First and Second Lebanese Wars. So when we come to Gaza, there we have a territory like any other territory in the whole world. It was created by whom? God. That's right. God created it. He can give it to whomsoever he desires. And he has promised it from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. Well, the river of Egypt isn't the Nile because that's a greater river than the Euphrates. Now, I think that it represents the Wadi el-Arish, or those who think that it's a little farther east than that. It is part of the land of promise. And a miracle happened on October 7th. Not because of the over 1,000 that were killed, but because 10,000 weren't killed. And we could go into this in more detail another time, but I have exhausted our time.